Hi everyone, I'm Zoe Booth. I'm the community manager at Quillette, and today I'm going to be talking to my boss and mentor and friend, Claire Lehmann. She founded Quillette in 2015, and we're going to be talking about a number of issues, including feminism and pandering to your audience online and content creation and how you can grow your audience. So here we are in our first Quillette podcast interview. And we're going to be talking about Claire's latest column in The Australian, for which she writes every week. And her column is about progressive ideologies and their effect on teens and adolescents and their mental health. So Claire, as you said, there's been a massive increase in teen suicides in Australia. 13 young people died this year.
I'm not sure there's actually an increase in teen suicide, but what we do know is there is a massive increase in teen anxiety and depression. And that's not just in Australia, it's all over the world. So there's lots of data showing that since 2012, rates of anxiety and depression have increased by about 30% to 50% in countries like the UK, the US, even in Scandinavia. So there's something going on. And psychologists are trying to work out what it is, what's changed for young people. And the most compelling argument or the most compelling hypothesis is that the environmental change is social media. But in my article, I also wrote that ideology might be having a role to play as well. And some fashionable theories and narratives associated with identity politics, to my mind, do not promote good mental health habits. Mm-hmm. And so I got into a little bit of that in the article.
Yeah. So which trends in particular do you think have the worst effect on teen mental health?
Well, identity politics promotes the idea that your membership of a group is one of the most, if not the most important aspect of your identity. So in my case, being a woman might be the most important thing about me. And I don't think that's a very helpful way to navigate the world. Our group identity should be the least interesting thing about us. And the other thing that identity politics promotes is this idea that our stories of hardship or victimization are very important. And I mean, they can be stories of hardship can be very important, particularly for ourselves when we're thinking about how we've overcome hardship. But there's a general trend where victim status is almost encouraged. Yeah. So it's not the getting over of hardship, it's the being in hardship is valorized. And so that's a problem. If you're trying to overcome anxiety and depression, you want to move forward from hardship. And there are various different ways of doing it, but wallowing in your victim status is not the most effective way to move out of those sort of bad mental states. And so I think that's just a bad habit to promote in young people who are suffering from mental health problems.
So what do you think is some of the solutions?
Well, I say to people, look, if you've been a victim of a crime or a victim of some kind of harsh circumstance, those experiences are important and we learn a lot from them, but they don't change who you are and they don't shape you. And I think particularly for young women, if they've been through a crisis or a particularly bad experience, this notion that they are traumatized for life, I think, is unhelpful. Just personal story, I was a victim of a crime when I was 19, 20. It was actually happened on my 20th birthday. I was assaulted by an ex-boyfriend. And it was traumatic, and I had post-traumatic anxiety, but I was not a traumatized person. And I rejected this notion that I was a victim because of that one experience. And although technically, yes, I was a victim of a crime, and I had to be a witness in a court case, and I received victims of crime compensation, I never internalized the identity of being a victim. And I think that rejection of a victim identity has served me well. And I worry when I see people sort of internalize this notion that they are traumatized or they are victims, that it doesn't work over the long term. You always have to move on from that. Otherwise, you'll feel sorry for yourself. You will think that you cannot do the things that other people can do because you're somehow damaged. And I just think it's not a constructive way to go through life.
I agree. And I know that when I was in that ideology, I suppose, I wallowed in my perceived suffering.
Yeah.
And I think it was Stoicism, learning about Stoicism actually, and coming across, thinkers such as Jordan Peterson, for example. He helped me to just, take control of my life and realize there's another way of handling these stresses. But obviously online, when you're on social media, you not only are you spending a lot of time on there, interacting, having shallow interactions with people you might not know, but you can also gain a lot of power by sharing your victimhood status. And I think you would agree that that's unhelpful.
Counterproductive. It might work in the short term. So there's a really good book by two sociologists called The Rise of Victimhood Culture by Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning. And in this book, they argue a new culture emerged on American university campuses, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something, in the 2010s. And they argued that people were starting to be given moral status or increased status because of their victim status. So increased moral, it's like you're a more important person. You're a better person if you're a victim or you've been a victim. And so this, they argued, was one of the drivers behind things like cancel culture, the deplatforming of speakers and this rise of fragility. Like, I can't go and listen to a conservative speaker because I might be traumatized by their words. This whole new culture. And it's a very compelling book, and they marshal a lot of evidence in support of their theory. And I think it's true. I think what they've identified is true. And I feel like my generation, so I'm an elder millennial, I feel like I came through and I grew up just before a lot of these trends started happening. And I grew up in a time when victimhood wasn't celebrated nearly as much as it is today. And the lessons of Stoicism were sort of implicit. Like, I do remember being taught as a child that sticks and stones may break your bone. Sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt.
Yeah.
Like, we were told that. And I think that, those lessons, they might seem harsh or insensitive, but they do, they are helpful, particularly when you're trying to move on from a difficult experience. And, life is not all about getting attention for being a victim. We have to do other things like managing our adult responsibilities, such as going to work, raising children, managing relationships with other people. We can't just be
perpetual victims.
Exactly. We have to be able to function.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that, having strategies for coping with stress is just essential.
So do you think that there's a gendered difference here, that maybe women are more susceptible to this ideology of victimhood?
Yeah, it's very tempting, I think, for women, young women in particular, to focus on difficult experiences and let those experiences define you. And I mean, women, we do have difficult experiences. Just being a woman means that we have more reproductive biological complications than men do. I mean, I'm a mother. I've been through childbirth. I mean, it is a difficult thing to go through. And so, just the very nature of being a woman means that we have a more precarious existence. But it also means that we kind of have to be tough or tougher in one sense, like if we want to succeed. And I just think we've sort of, it's not really that new. So this trend of women sort of identifying with this idea that they're oppressed or they're victims. I mean, in many ways, it's just a reincarnation of a Victorian conception of womanhood, which is that we are fragile flowers. We need protection from men. We need protection from the rough and tumble of the world. I mean, that notion of womanhood is far more historically the standard historically than the notion that we are equal with men and we can live our own lives on our own terms. I actually prefer that notion of womanhood, that we are self-determining individuals. But the fact that we're sort of going back to this old-fashioned conception. Yeah, it's ironic, but it's not entirely surprising to me.
I guess they've just replaced the Victorian image of we need protection from men and by men to we need to dismantle the systems of, patriarchy and systemic power.
Very similar. I think it's we need So in Victorian era, it's we needed protection by men from men, and now it's we need protection from the state, from men or from the world. So instead of the patriarchy, the protector is still an authority figure, but it's the state, it's the government.
Yeah.
So we need protection from nasty words on the internet, or we need protection from, awkward sexual encounters at university.
Yeah. But it's strange, isn't it? Because it's sort of like the narrative at the moment is we're strong, independent women. We can do whatever the hell we want to. We can be completely autonomous. We don't even need to have, babies or families. We can just, be boss bitches essentially. But at the same time that we're fragile and perpetual victims of oppression. So when I started to realize that didn't really make sense, I was like, it made me question liberal feminism.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of contradictions in modern day feminism. And, I think all of us as women have to sort of come to our own interpretation and take what we need and reject what we don't.
Yeah.
And so for me, I certainly internalize a lot of the messages from liberal feminism on a psychological level. But on a physical level, I'm more ready to acknowledge that, yes, I am weaker than the average male, and I have no problem with that. So I sort of, I mean, I definitely consider myself a feminist, but I'm also a big reader of psychology, and evolutionary psychology is part of that. And so acknowledging that there are not just physical sex differences, but psychological sex differences as well. And that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that our behavior is determined simply because we have innate differences or we're born pre-wired, but it does mean that it does help make sense of some of the patterns of behavior that we see in the world.
And I know you're a big fan of Camille Paglia.
Yeah.
As am I.
Yeah.
When did you first come across her work, and how would you, for people who might not know about Camille, how would you describe her work?
So I first discovered Paglia's work when I was in undergraduate university, doing my arts degree at Adelaide University. And so I was studying arts, and my courses were heavily influenced by postmodern theory, which I found tedious. And I don't know how I came across her. I think maybe I was searching for criticisms of Michael Foucault online, and I found an essay that she had written, which was very critical of Foucault. And it was also very funny and biting. And I was like, this woman is amazing. And so I looked up her books at my university library, and I found that my university, to their credit, had all of her books.
Amazing.
And so I would spend time, rather than study my course materials, I would spend time in the library reading her books. So I read Vamps and Tramps and Sexual Personae, and there's another collection of essays so she's an essayist, I think, more than a book author, but that's fine. I mean, her essays are perfectly encapsulated, and they stand the test of time. I mean, reading them now, going back and reading them now, is just as exciting and stimulating as it was for me in the early 2000s. And she wrote the essays in the 1990s, so they're quite old now. Yeah. And I think they will be read 50, 100 years from now.
Are there any other writers writing about these topics, maybe challenging mainstream feminism? Any other authors that you've got a lot from?
Well, I'm more a reader of scientific texts. So empirical psychologists don't write in a polemical way challenging feminist orthodoxy. However, they will, just reading papers by David Buss or Roy Baumeister, who's developed a theory of sexual economics, or even Steven Pinker, reading The Blank Slate. It's not that these texts take on feminism directly, but indirectly they challenge some of the assumptions that orthodox feminism sort of has rested on. And I don't mean the political or moral proposition that men and women are morally equal. I 100% agree with that. And I'm an equal opportunity feminist. I mean, I have a career and run my own business, and just a couple of generations ago I wouldn't be able to have any of those things. So I'm not naive about how much I've benefited from feminism as a political movement. However, in our lifetime, there's been a lot of silly notions around men and women not having any psychological sex differences, our brains being absolutely identical, and the only differences that exist are because of social constructionism. And that has sort of morphed into this absurd ideology, which we call gender ideology, which takes on the claim that we are the same physically, and that it's not an unfair advantage for a biological male to compete in female sports. So what I object to is not feminism, it's this assumption that biology doesn't exist. So if you have a version of feminism that takes on all of the political and moral messages that we are equal, but it also acknowledges at the same time that there are biological differences. I mean, we completely support that and do. But it's this sort of anti-scientific notion that sex differences can't exist because if they do, it means that we are not equal. I don't accept that.
Yeah. And it's interesting that feminism sort of branched or split into, you know, the radical feminists who are really taking a stand against this gender ideology, and then the more like mainstream feminists who are just sort of going along with it. But do you think that radical feminism has, or the rad fems have something to answer for, like that they're sort of...
They set the stage for gender ideology.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, and it's possible. I think that, but at the same time, so I mean, radical feminism is a bit of a strange and obscure ideology, and they took on this Marxist notion that all women are oppressed by all men, and that gender is like a class. And I don't know if radical feminism was ever that popular. And I'm not sure if the people who really pushed for the idea that there are no psychological sex differences, I don't know if they would describe themselves as radical feminists.
What about Germaine Greer? Like, I actually didn't read The Female Eunuch. I listened to it. And I tend to not pay as much attention when I listen to an audiobook. But I do remember a chapter of that book in which she seemed to be arguing that like the science on brain differences between men and women were always clouded by bias. And I do know a lot of feminists, especially like older feminists, who do believe that. And I'm sure there's some truth to it that, you know, possibly there was some bias.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's right. So there is the idea that gender, what we see as gendered behavior, is entirely socially constructed and not linked to biology. I think that has now resulted in this idea that you can just put on a dress and change your pronouns and suddenly you're a woman. So it's not feminism, it's radical social constructionism. Yeah. It's that ideology, and that's the ideology that turned me off mainstream feminism to begin with. It's the assumption that our behavior is a product of socialization and has very little input from biology. That is what pushed sort of feminism off the rails a little bit, and has now resulted in this sort of crazy ideology where we have to say that trans women are women, and we can't point out that the experience of being a woman is just fundamentally different on a biological level. And even aside from psychological experiences, I mean, we just have different biologies.
For sure.
And so, but to be honest, I think that some of the feminists and some of the scholars and theorists who were radical social constructionists may have changed their minds. I mean, I don't know, but I would be surprised if they haven't, in 2023, I would be surprised if they haven't updated their positions.
Definitely.
I mean, Germaine Greer has probably updated her position. And so, I mean, that's okay. Like, people are allowed to change their mind, and I don't think we can hold it against them that, okay, so you were wrong. Now we've got this crazy activist movement, therefore, you know, like there's no way they could have predicted this would be the outcome.
Yeah. And that sort of leads me into another topic about how people can be fans of one ideology or one thinker, for example. I'm thinking about, for example, Sam Harris, right? So Sam Harris had and still has a very large following until, COVID came about, and Trump, and lots of his followers took issue with his, rejection of Trump and his politics. And then just because of that one difference of opinion, many of his followers or fans, or not many, but a very vocal minority perhaps, fled and made it very public that they were just fleeing. So do you think that that's become more prevalent in this day and age, that if you don't agree with a thinker on one topic, you just give up on them? Or do you think that that's just human nature and we've always been like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And to be honest, I've probably changed my mind on certain individuals and certain thinkers because of their views on maybe Ukraine or vaccination. I mean, to me, if a person is siding with Putin or making excuses for a tyrant to invade a country unilaterally, I mean, that makes me question their judgment on other issues. And similarly with if someone is sowing doubt and distrust of vaccination, that makes me question their scientific competence.
Yeah.
And so I have changed my mind on certain thinkers and individuals as well. And maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe that's tribal of me. I think, though, we can acknowledge when people have expertise in one area, but maybe they don't have expertise in other areas, and be more forgiving in those certain contexts. When it comes to Sam Harris, I think I think the way he's been treated has been unfair. But the reality is that the online world is very tribal. Audiences demand a level of loyalty to certain tribal affiliate signifiers, and if you don't demonstrate your tribal loyalty, you can be ostracized quite viciously, and there's a certain level of animosity reserved for people who are viewed as traitors, even more than people who have never been seen as part of the in-group. And so, yeah, I think the treatment of him has been unfair, but I think all credit to him, he's shown a level of integrity that I think a lot of public figures haven't shown. And even if he expresses himself in a way that is liable to get him in trouble, good for him for being honest about what he thinks,
for having integrity and a backbone.
I mean, there's so many performance artists.
Yes.
There are so many people who pander to their audience, who take cues from their audience and then just spoon feed their audience what they think they want to hear. And that's the definition of being a hack.
Do you think they're conscious of what they're doing, or they're just so scared that they sort of do it subconsciously or unconsciously?
Well, I think there's probably a spectrum. So I think some people are genuine performance artists, and they probably don't have a single principle in their bodies and have never had a set of principles, and are not particularly intellectual either. So a person can be intelligent without being intellectual. And some of these performance artists are very smart. They're very articulate, but they serve a purpose, and that is to provide an audience with confirmation bias and entertainment, infotainment. And they do their job very well, and they're rewarded handsomely for it. But someone like Sam Harris is not an infotainment provider. He is actually a thinker, and it's difficult in this day and age. You have to be very thick-skinned in this day and age to not give your audience exactly what they want all the time, but he's managed that, and all credit to him.
Have you ever been tempted to keep your mouth shut on something that you know your audience wouldn't like, or have you ever given into that and regretted it, or what's your experience with that?
I would say that I have probably not kept my mouth shut enough, particularly on social media, so on Twitter. And I regret some of the choices I've made, not because I was dishonest, but I was probably impulsive and lacked the grace that I think mature adults should exhibit. So in just shooting down people who have been critical, or replying to trolls in a nasty way, or even, one of the dangers or pitfalls of Twitter is that you can let trolling is not the only danger. You can let adulation sort of go to your head, and you can think that having a couple of 100,000 followers is somehow important, and when it's not important at all and has no bearing on the real world. And I would actually say that's the biggest risk. The biggest risk of social media is thinking that a following on social media actually means something. It doesn't mean much. It doesn't mean you're going to earn money. It doesn't translate necessarily into money. It doesn't translate into any kind of loyal fan base, because people will turn on you within a second if, they feel that you're some kind of traitor to their cause. If anything, it's a distraction from what is really going to change your life, which is earning a steady income as a content creator, developing loyal supporters who support you through financial pledges. All of that is better done outside of social media, and social media actually just becomes a massive distraction and waste of time, in my experience.
Wow. Okay. So what tips would you have for content creators today, whether they be people who are starting their own, Substacks or other platforms, or YouTubers, maybe talking about intellectual stuff that we like to talk about, or podcasters?
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for them?
Oh, definitely. So if you're starting your own publication, you want to publish a lot. So publishing, it depends if you're going to be on your own or with a group of friends. Either way, you want to have regular content coming out. So on Quillette, we have articles being published every day. So that keeps people coming back. Social media can be useful for distribution, but it can also be a massive time waster. And it's good to be able to recognize when you're wasting time and it's not being productive. I think in this era, not being unpredictable is generally a positive. So coming up with some kind of original insights or analysis that don't conform to a standard left-wing or right-wing kind of perspective is always going to attract an audience, because people are hungry for interesting, novel, original ideas. And then once you get a following, the most important following is an email subscriber list. So the people who subscribe to your email list are worth 10 times as more to you as a Twitter follower. And that is because if you have people subscribing to your email list, they are likely to give you money, and they're also likely to read your content rather than just the headline of an article. They're more likely to actually read what you write rather than retweet something simply because the headline caught their eye, or because they saw you they saw your face on Twitter and thought it was a pretty face or whatever, and so they followed you because of it. Yeah,
Not speaking from experience here.
No, it's just a much more substantial indicator of support.
Yeah.
So Quillette's got about coming up to about 100,000 email subscribers, and to me, our email subscribers they're the backbone of our business, and we want to give those email subscribers a good product, and that's what occupies my time. And I'm much happier now that I'm focusing more on those 100,000 email subscribers rather than worrying about the couple of 100,000 Twitter followers that I had, who, half of them may have been hate following me anyway. It's just such a waste of time.
Yeah. I agree. Like, what tips do you have for building your email list?
Well, I mean, there are the standard way is just to have a really easy. I mean, today it's really easy because you have Substack and you have Ghost, and all of that functionality is built in. But when I started Quillette, we didn't have that functionality. I had a WordPress website, and I had to implement forms for people to sign up with. It wasn't automatic like it is now. So today we have software that makes it really easy for people to start publications, start newsletters, start a career as a content creator, and it's great. And the payment method is built in as well, which is fantastic, and that wasn't around when I started.
Yeah.
So I think just using one of the platforms like Substack or Ghost is the way to go.
And putting up, as we did at Quillette, we put up it's not a paywall. It actually, sometimes it looked like a paywall. We tried to make it clear that it wasn't. But yeah, putting up some sort of a barrier so that people had to give their email, which, some people complain about, and they say it's unfair, and they've subscribed to enough mailing lists, and I get it. My inbox is a bit of a mess as well. But, we do pay our authors and that we have staff, and okay, well, it's been great talking.
Thanks for having me, Zoe.
My pleasure. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, great. Thank you.